Hello, welcome to the Commander Basic tutorial. This is Commander Crane and I'm going to show you what you need to know before you start using the Commander role. First of all, Hell Let Loose depends on 3 different types of resources: manpower, munitions, and fuel. By default, you will have 30 per minute for each resource. However, each node made will increase each resource by 10. You will know that you are at max nodes if you see that you have 60 per minute, like you see here on the top of the map for each resource. If you ever notice that there is more than 60 per minute in a resource, that means the commander has used Encourage and it will expire, and I will explain this later. So, some of you may be wondering, how do you make nodes? These resources can be made by engineers, and the engineers use supplies to make these resource nodes. It costs 50 supplies to make 1 node, and 3 separate engineers have to each make 3 nodes to max out nodes. I'm going to show you an example of how someone has to make nodes. Typically, they take a truck, they have to drive to the 3rd sector, drop supplies, and then walk back to the 2nd sector, 2nd row, to make the nodes. I'm just going to show you how this is typically done. It's important for the commander to understand how this is done. I can make a separate video about this, but anyway, you just come down, you drop your nodes here, you build them up, and you just tell people to do this. That is all you need to know about nodes. Now let's talk about abilities. First, I will address the Manpower ability. Manpower abilities are found at the top right of the map. This resource drains by 1 every time someone on your team dies. Think of Manpower as a primary way to boost your node production through the most powerful and important ability a commander has, Encourage. Encourage doubles the production of all nodes for 5 minutes. It has a 10-minute cooldown. It should only be used if you have max nodes, but can be reluctantly used if you have 2 sets of nodes made. It is not worth using if you only have 1 set of nodes unless you have thousands of manpower. Next, we will talk about airheads. Airheads are spawns for the entire team that you can drop from the sky. They can drop anywhere on the map, except they cannot drop 3 squares or more deep behind the enemy lines. Airheads cost 400 manpower and have a 10-minute cooldown. Dismantle Garrison is used to remove any garrison on the map, although it is generally better to go to the garrison yourself and hold down F to dismantle it. It costs 100 manpower and has a 5-minute cooldown. Reinforce can only be used on defense. This doubles your cap strength for friendly units inside the circle. Only use it if you have a lot of defenders but the enemy is still taking the point. I usually use it when at 50% cap with many defenders. Using it when you have no one defending is wasteful and it does nothing. It costs 200 manpower and has a 5-minute cooldown. Next, we will talk about munitions. Your munitions are located on the middle right of the map. Munitions are the most frequently wasted resource by novice commanders. Think of munitions as your supplies for bombing runs and artillery. Everything else is secondary. Do not use munition resources if it means you cannot use a bombing run or artillery. With that said, bombing runs are the most powerful weapon in the game. Bombing runs devastate one area of the map. It destroys everything except outposts, enemy fortifications, and heavy and medium tanks. However, I will say that it will destroy heavy and medium tank tracks, and very rarely may blow them up if it is a direct hit by one of the bombs. It costs 300 munitions and has a 10-minute cooldown. Bombing runs should not be used only to rack up a bunch of kills. They are primarily meant for taking out enemy garrisons before a push, like it is shown here. Similarly, the Soviet Union has Katyusha rocket strikes. These are less precise and cover a wide area. They're not very effective usually, but they can be called in more frequently. Soviet commanders should use almost nothing else for munitions except rocket strikes to be most effective. Of course, use other abilities if you have the resources. They cost 300 munitions and have a 5-minute cooldown. Bombing runs have a 10-minute cooldown, so rockets can be used twice as often. Next, we will talk about supply drops. Supply drops drop 100 supplies anywhere on the map. They are primarily used for making red zone garrisons, since they cost 100 supplies to make. Commanders should drop these often and plan ahead for taking the next sector. Supply drops cost 50 supplies and have a 2-minute cooldown. Now I will discuss the ammo drop. The ammo drop drops 12 explosive ammo and normal ammo anywhere on the map, but do not use this.
It is extremely expensive for what you get. It is often destroyed by the enemy. Your team usually has no idea where it is because the icon for it is super small. It makes more sense to have support players drop ammo and explosives.
The recon plane reveals the enemy wherever they were when it flew over. Infantry inside buildings will not be spotted. Try to use these in combination with a bombing run to get the most use out of them.
Recon planes cost 150 supplies, and they have a 5-minute cooldown. Precision strikes devastate a small area. They should only be used to take out stationary heavy tanks or very troubling medium tanks. Do not use precision strikes on things that can be very easily destroyed by something else, like using it on a tank that is about to be destroyed by another tank. Only use these as a last resort. They are not good at destroying garrisons, but they can. They cost 250 munitions and have a 20-minute cooldown, and that's why you should only use them if you absolutely need to. Strafing runs are a way to deliver a quick attack on the map. At the beginner level, almost never use it. You will likely do nothing but waste munitions for 1 or 2 kills. I use these on defense when 1 or 2 kills may make a difference in a close cap, or use these when an essential backline garrison is being dismantled. Backline garrisons are 3 sectors in your territory, and they take a minute for someone to dismantle. Normal garrisons take just a few seconds. Strafing runs cost 150 munitions and have a 4-minute cooldown. Next, we will talk about using fuel. Fuel can be located at the bottom right part of your map. Fuel is only used if the commander uses it. While manpower drains due to team deaths and munitions drain from artillery or anti-tank gun use, fuel does not. Because of this, and the fact that tanks do not usually need to be constantly spawned, you tend to have an abundance of fuel. If this happens, you should constantly convert the fuel to manpower and munitions. There are tanks and trucks that naturally spawn, but they do not consume fuel. In general, you want to spawn heavy tanks with excess fuel, but put these in spawns that you do not need to spawn trucks or a half-track in, unless someone is getting in the tank as soon as you spawn it. If you have the fuel, it is always a good idea to have at least 1 supply truck sitting in spawn. That way, engineers have something to make nodes with, or squad leaders can use it to make garrisons. Half-tracks are mobile garrisons that cost 300 fuel. In general, they should only be used if you have plenty of fuel for heavy tanks. There are some exceptions to this, however I'll go over that in the advanced tutorial. When you are using the half-track, just be sure you turn off the engine before you get out, otherwise no one can spawn on it. Jeeps are fun to use and extremely fast. They can drop ammo, but it is very impractical to use it for this reason when you have support players, and most people die in 10 seconds after spawning in anyway. They cost 80 munitions and have a 5-minute cooldown. Basically, they're only useful for recon players to quickly get to the artillery of the enemy team, or anything that requires a lot of speed. Otherwise, it's just more practical to take a supply truck so you can make some garrisons along the way for wherever you're trying to go. Another thing that a commander needs to know is that if a red zone garrison is not spawnable, that means there is at least 1 enemy within 100 meters of it. It is senseless to defend these garrisons unless you know exactly where the enemy is. Do not use a strafing run on locked red zone garrisons. It will likely hit no one. Locked blue zone garrisons mean an enemy is standing right beside the garrison, and as mentioned before, strafing runs can be used on these to defend them. Well, that wraps up the basics. If you have watched this entire video, then you are ready to jump in and try Commander. But that's not everything. There are tactics and tiny details that you won't know until you play for hundreds or thousands of hours. I will point out these details in my next video. Subscribe to see it. For those watching this in the future, you can find this video in the comments section or in the description. You should still subscribe because it would make me happy. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you all next time.